we're back with more of The Terrible Two by Jory and Mac Barnett, illustrated by Kevin Cornell. We're on chapter 34, so let's get started. A line of cows 500 feet long proceeded 2 by 2 down Chapman Drive, one of the quietest streets in the sleepy town of Yawny Valley. Niles and Miles had plotted their route carefully. It was 3:13 a.m. and nobody was out. Niles rang the bell on his bike twice. Intersection. Then Miles was sprinting again, up on the lawns, hopping edges, maybe trampling a couple of early blooming flower beds. He arrived at the corner of Chapman and Trellis well before Niles, who was weaving slowly to give Miles plenty of time to unshoulder his backpack and take out Niles' quick-pitch tent. He tossed it into the air with a flick of the wrist, and the tent sproinged as it unfolded at the peak of its arc. It landed and bounced. Miles positioned the tent on one side of the intersection, blocking off Trellis Drive in one direction. At least that was the idea. The tent looked puny now in the middle of the road, and Miles hoped it was enough to discourage the cows from bolting off down the wrong street. It would have to be. Miles took his position on the other side of Trellis. Niles cruised by wearing a madman's grin. And then the cows. They gave him placid looks. Wild looks. Accusing looks. The cows were close enough for Miles to touch. So he did. The cow flinched when Miles reached out and brushed his hand against her flank. Her hair was coarse and damp and warm. Miles put his hand to his nose. He smelled like an animal. It was the first time Miles had touched a cow. The old cows dragged past and the intersection was clear. It was time to fold up the tent. This was supposed to be simple, but Miles had never gotten the hang of it. The idea was the same as the collapsible silver sunshade Miles' mom had in her car, but Miles had never been able to figure that out either. After wrestling the tent for about a minute, Miles had gotten it down to a pokey, misshapen lump small enough to fit back in the backpack. Miles took off down the road and caught up with the herd just in time to hear Niles ring his bell twice again. There were 6 more intersections on their path that night, and by the 4th, Miles was running down the street, hugging the pitched tent in front of himself. He fumbled. He tripped. But they made it without losing a single cow, and by 3:56 they were making their way down Sunny Slope Road, the home stretch. 5 urgent rings from Niles' bell. They had company. At the head of the line, Niles was waving to a figure standing in the middle of a house's front lawn. As Miles got closer, he saw it was a man, an old man, wearing nothing but his boxer shorts. The man stood agog, watching the cows parade by his house. "If anyone sees us, and they probably won't," Niles had said back in the prank lab, "just play it by ear. You're good in the moment." Miles tried to take a nervous gulp, but his throat was too tight. By the time he made it up to the man's mailbox, he still hadn't figured out what to say. It turned out the man wasn't wearing just boxers. He also had a terry cloth sweatband around his head. His white hair was uncombed and shone in the moonlight. They were so close. If this fell apart now... "What are you doing in the middle of town with all these cows?" asked the man. "What are you doing out in your underwear at 4 a.m, Miles replied. "Fair enough," said the man. And that was that. 8 minutes later, Niles led the cows up the driveway to Yawny Valley Science and Letters Academy. He leapt off his bike and dragged the wagon up the front steps, spilling hay as he went. The key ring Niles pulled out was so big, Miles could see it from the back of the herd. Niles fiddled with the lock and slipped inside. In less than 5 seconds, the front hall glowed yellow. Niles threw the doors open. Niles pitched some more hay onto the threshold. "Come, boss," he said, then disappeared inside, dragging the wagon behind him. Bossy sniffed the steps. She snorted and moaned. Then she took the steps in 2 clumsy hops. Her head was inside, then her withers, then her rump and her tail, and then the next cow. Miles pushed forward against the herd's misgivings, exerting steady pressure from behind. The cows disliked Miles more than they disliked stairs, and they loved moving together. It only took 6 minutes to get 107 cows through the front door of Yawny Valley Science and Letters Academy. When the last rump was through, Miles shut the door. He waited outside. Niles flipped off the lights and slammed the front door shut. "Happy April Fool's Day," he said. Miles and Niles collapsed on their backs on the school's wet grass. Miles held 2 fingers up to the sky. "High five." Niles held up 2. "High five." Then they laughed, and they laughed. Chapter 35. The Barkins' phone rang at 4:03 a.m. Principal Barkin picked it up and said, Barry, this is your father, former Principal Barkin. Am I waking you up? No, said Principal Barkin. Don't lie to me. I can hear the sleep in your voice. Is something wrong? Asked Principal Barkin. Do you know what day it is? It's April 1st, also known as April Fool's Day, and you are sleeping like a fool. You should be up writing your April Fool's power speech. I wrote it last night, said Principal Barkin. Then you should be up practicing. Okay. Planning your pauses. Okay. Putting power into your voice. Okay. Ensuring that every student knows there will be zero tolerance for April Fool's pranks. You know, Dad, said Principal Barkin, some people might say calling a person at 4 a.m. is an April Fool's prank. How dare you! This is not a prank. I'm not pranking you right now. I have never pranked in my life. That was a joke, Dad. A joke or a prank? There's a fine line between joke and prank, Barry, and you're stepping right up to that line when you accuse your father of pranking. A pranking principal, just like your grandpa Jimmy. You know, he wants... I better go practice my speech, Dad. Then go! Bye. Give Josh and Sharon my love! Barry Barkin sat on the edge of his bed in the dark. That was my father, he told his wife. He sends his love. Said Mrs. Barkin. Principal Barkin couldn't get back to sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw Miles Murphy's face. That little prankster was probably planning something. Principal Barkin decided that his father was right. His father was always right. He turned on his bedside lamp. At 6:03, Principal Barkin showered, shaved, and full of oatmeal on toast, pulled into his parking spot behind the school. He activated his new car alarm and walked up the steps to the rear entrance of Yanni Valley Science and Letters Academy. Barkin sniffed. It smelled like cows this morning. Must be a strong wind blowing in from the farmland. Barkin entered the school. In the dark, on the way to the light switch, he bumped into something large and hairy. I don't remember any of this, he mumbled. Barkin flipped on the lights. It was a cow. Barkin almost laughed. April Fools, he said to the cow. Principal Barkin had a list of suspects that was exactly 1 kid long. Apparently, this was Miles Murphy's idea of an April Fool's joke. Too bad Miles didn't know his principal liked to get to school early. Principal Barkin had plenty of time to lead this cow out the back door and down those. Principal Barkin put his hand on his principal pack. Fact 586. That cow couldn't get downstairs. Fine. This was fine. He had plenty of time to squash this April Fool's joke. The earliest students wouldn't be arriving for almost an hour. That was plenty of time to hide this cow in his office. This way, cow, Principal Barkin said to the cow. The cow didn't say anything. Soon Principal Barkin was behind the cow, pushing. Then he was in front of the cow, pulling. The cow didn't move. Move, cow, said Principal Barkin, now behind the cow again. That's when a second cow, curious about the commotion, rounded the corner. 2 cows, said Principal Barkin. This prank was more elaborate than he'd thought. Barkin wasn't sure he could fit 2 cows in his office. Maybe he could stash 1 in the faculty bathroom. A third cow ambled over. Barry Barkin began to get a terrible feeling. He tiptoed to the corner and peered around. No, said Principal Barkin. No, 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 no. He ran down the halls. He saw more cows. No, 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 no. Cows in classrooms. No, 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 no. This was bad. This was very bad. Barkin needed an idea. Some way to salvage the school day. He needed a place to think. A place away from all these cows. He ran up the stairs, pushing through more cows, and opened the door to the supply closet. His sanctuary, his fortress. He turned on the light. No. A cow was chewing on a mop. It was the master stroke. And that was the end of chapter 35. What'd you think? Comment on the post below.